Before we start, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Maybe you're thinking about someone you should call more often. Maybe you've lost a parent and wish you could have one more conversation. Maybe you're wondering how relationships with our parents change as we get older, as we become parents ourselves, as we start to see them not just as mom and dad, but as human beings who are figuring it out just like we are. This conversation is for you. Every Sunday at exactly 10 a.m. my time, I call my mother. It doesn't matter where I am in the world, what crisis is happening at work, or how busy my schedule is. For the past 12 years, since I turned 42 and realized that time with the people you love isn't unlimited, I've made this call. And every week, without fail, my 77-year-old mother teaches me something I didn't know I needed to learn. This isn't a story about being a good son, though I hope I am one. It's not about guilt or obligation, though those played a role in the beginning. This is a story about what happens when you show up consistently for someone who shaped you and how that act of showing up changes you in ways you never expected. It's about discovering that your parents never stop being your teachers, even when you think you've surpassed them in worldly success. It's about learning that wisdom and intelligence are different things, that experience and education serve different purposes, and that some of life's most important lessons can only come from someone who has loved you longer than you've loved yourself. My mother, May, doesn't run companies or build rockets or design cars, but she's built something more impressive than any technology I've ever created. A life of resilience, grace, and quiet strength that has weathered storms I'm only beginning to understand. And every Sunday, through our conversations, she passes pieces of that wisdom to me. I started these calls for selfish reasons, if I'm being honest. I was in my early 40s, successful by any external measure, but feeling disconnected from the foundations that had made that success possible. I was so focused on building the future that I had stopped paying attention to the past that had prepared me for it. I realized I knew more about rocket fuel than I knew about my own mother's dreams, more about battery chemistry than about the experiences that had shaped her character. The first few calls were awkward. We didn't have a rhythm. I didn't know how to be a son to someone I had started seeing as just another person in my life who needed occasional maintenance. She didn't know how to be a mother to someone who seemed to have all the answers. We talked about weather, about work, about surface, things that felt safe but didn't satisfy either of us. But something beautiful happens when you commit to showing up regularly for someone you love. The awkwardness fades. The superficial conversations become bridges to deeper ones. The obligation transforms into anticipation. You start to rediscover each other as human beings, not just as the roles you've played in each other's lives. Now, 12 years later, these Sunday calls are one of the most valuable hours of my week. Not because they're always easy or pleasant, but because they're real. Because in a world where most of my interactions are strategic, these conversations are simply human. Because my mother sees me not as a CEO or an entrepreneur or a public figure, but as the boy she raised, the young man she worried about, the adult she's proud of but still wants to protect. Last Sunday, she told me about a conversation she had with her neighbor who's struggling with cancer. She talked about how she's been bringing meals, listening to fears, offering the kind of presence that doesn't try to fix but simply acknowledges. As she described this woman's courage in facing uncertainty, I realized my mother was teaching me something about leadership that no business book could capture. Real strength, she was showing me, isn't about having all the answers or projecting confidence you don't feel. Real strength is about showing up for people when they're afraid, offering your presence when your solutions aren't enough, being willing to sit with someone else's pain without trying to make it go away. I've tried to apply this lesson in my companies. When Tesla was struggling, when SpaceX rockets were exploding, when employees were scared about job security, and investors were questioning our direction, I learned to offer presence alongside solutions, to acknowledge fear instead of dismissing it, to be human with people instead of just being right. My mother never ran a company, but she understood something about leading people through uncertainty that took me years to learn. 3 weeks ago, she told me about a decision she was wrestling with about her living situation. She's been in the same house for 15 years, but it's getting harder to maintain, and some of her friends are suggesting she consider assisted living. She's torn between independence and practicality, between pride and wisdom, between what she wants and what might be best. As she talked through her fears about losing autonomy, about admitting she might need help, about what this change would mean for her identity, I recognized something familiar. These were the same fears I'd felt when I had to step back from day-to-day operations at some of my companies, when I had to trust other people to carry forward visions I had created. But listening to my mother work through these questions, I learned something about the difference between giving up control and choosing to trust others. She wasn't losing her independence by considering assistance. She was exercising her independence by making proactive choices about her care. She wasn't admitting defeat, she was demonstrating wisdom. This insight changed how I think about delegation in my businesses, about succession planning, about the difference between being needed and being valuable. My mother was teaching me that true strength sometimes looks like accepting help, that wisdom often requires letting go of what worked before in favor of what works now. 2 months ago, during one of our calls, she mentioned almost casually that she had forgiven my father. Not for my benefit or because anyone asked her to, but because she realized that carrying anger was costing her more than it was costing him. She talked about how forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter, but about choosing peace over resentment. This wasn't theoretical for her. She had lived through a difficult divorce, years of financial struggle, the challenge of rebuilding her life as a single mother. She had earned her anger, but she chose to release it anyway, not because my father deserved forgiveness, but because she deserved peace. Hearing her talk about this process, I understood something about forgiveness that all my reading and thinking had never made clear. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else, it's a gift you give to yourself. It's not about being noble or spiritual, it's about being practical. Anger is expensive. Resentment is exhausting. Forgiveness is simply good economics for your emotional life. This lesson has helped me navigate business relationships, personal disappointments, and the inevitable conflicts that come with trying to build something meaningful. My mother taught me that holding grudges is like keeping receipts for things you'll never return. It just clutters up space you could use for something better. But it's not just the big life lessons that make these calls valuable. It's also the small observations, the gentle corrections, the perspective that only comes from someone who has lived longer and seen more. A few months ago, I was complaining to her about someone who had criticized one of my projects publicly. I was frustrated, feeling like the criticism was unfair and poorly informed. I was planning my response, crafting arguments, preparing to defend my work. My mother listened patiently, then asked a simple question. Do you think this person's opinion will matter in 5 years? The answer was obviously no. This person wasn't a customer, wasn't an expert in the field, wasn't someone whose judgment would affect the actual success or failure of the project. But I was prepared to spend significant mental energy engaging with their criticism anyway. Then why, she asked gently, are you giving them so much space in your head today? This question has become a filter I use regularly now. When someone criticizes my work, when conflicts arise, when problems demand my attention, I ask myself, will this matter in 5 years? If not, how much energy does it deserve today? My mother taught me that not every battle is worth fighting, not because you can't win, but because winning doesn't accomplish anything meaningful. She taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to criticism is no response at all. During one call last winter, she told me about a young mother in her neighborhood who was struggling with postpartum depression. My mother had been checking on her, bringing groceries, offering to hold the baby so this woman could shower or sleep. She talked about how isolated the young mother felt, how she was convinced she was failing at the most basic human task. As my mother described her interactions with this woman, I realized she was demonstrating something I had never learned to do well, how to help someone without trying to fix them. She wasn't offering advice about depression or solutions for better parenting. She was simply offering presence, practical support, and the message that struggling doesn't mean failing. This taught me something about leadership that I'm still learning to apply. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone who's struggling is not to solve their problem, but to normalize their struggle. Not to give them answers, but to give them permission to not have all the answers yet. In my companies, I've started paying more attention to when people are struggling, not because they lack competence, but because they're facing challenges that naturally feel overwhelming. Instead of immediately jumping to solutions, I try to first acknowledge that what they're experiencing is normal, that struggling with difficult things doesn't indicate weakness. My mother showed me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone is not, "Here's how to fix this," but "This is hard, and it's okay that you're finding it hard." These Sunday calls have also taught me about the importance of routine in relationships. At first, I thought calling every week was excessive, that I should call when I had something important to say or when my mother needed something specific. But I've learned that regular contact creates a different kind of relationship than sporadic contact, even if the individual conversations seem less significant. When you talk to someone every week, you start to notice patterns in their mood, changes in their health, shifts in their concerns. You become part of their regular rhythm of life, and they become part of yours. You stop seeing each other only during crises or celebrations, and start sharing the ordinary moments that make up most of a life. This has changed how I think about all my important relationships. I've started scheduling regular check-ins with key people in my companies, not because there's always something urgent to discuss, but because regular contact prevents small problems from becoming big ones and creates space for conversations that wouldn't happen otherwise. I've learned that consistency in relationships, like compound interest in finance, creates value that isn't obvious in any single interaction but becomes significant over time. One of the most surprising things about these calls is how they've changed my relationship with my own children. Hearing my mother talk about her concerns for me, her pride in my accomplishments, her occasional disappointment in my choices, has helped me understand what my own children might be experiencing as they watch me navigate parenthood. When my mother mentions that she worries about how much I work, or that she wishes I would take better care of my health, or that she hopes I'm making time for relationships outside of business, I realize these are probably similar to concerns my children have about me. When she expresses pride in something I've accomplished, I understand better how important it is for me to express pride in my children's efforts, not just their achievements. My mother has taught me that being a parent doesn't end when your children become adults, it just changes form. You stop trying to control their choices and start trying to support their journey. You offer your perspective when asked, but you resist the urge to impose it when it's not wanted. This has helped me understand how to be present for my children as they grow into their own people, how to be available without being intrusive, how to care without controlling. Perhaps most importantly, these calls have taught me about aging with grace. My mother is 77, and while she's healthy and active, she's also realistic about the changes that come with growing older. She talks openly about her physical limitations, her concerns about memory, her awareness that her time is finite, but she does this without bitterness or despair. She approaches aging the same way she's approached every other challenge in her life, with curiosity about what she might learn, gratitude for what she still has, and determination to make the most of whatever time remains. Watching her navigate this stage of life is teaching me how I want to approach my own aging, not with denial or panic, but with acceptance and intentionality, not fighting against time, but making the most of it. She's showing me that aging doesn't have to mean diminishing, that limitations don't have to mean defeat, that acknowledging your mortality can actually enhance your appreciation for being alive. These Sunday calls have become more than just a way to stay connected with my mother. They become a weekly reminder of what matters most, a regular dose of perspective that keeps me grounded in a world that can feel unmoored from human values. In a life filled with strategic conversations, they offer relationship without agenda. In days packed with problem solving, They provide space for simply being present with someone you love. In a career focused on building the future, they connect me to the past that made that future possible. My mother may not understand rocket science or battery technology or artificial intelligence, but she understands human nature, resilience, love, loss, hope, and the art of building a meaningful life. And every Sunday, she reminds me that these are the technologies that matter most. I call my mother every Sunday, not because I'm a perfect son, but because I'm a son who's learning that wisdom comes in many forms, that teachers appear in many roles, and that some of life's most important lessons can only be learned from someone who has loved you unconditionally, since before you knew love was possible. If you have a parent you could call them. If you've lost a parent, honor what they taught you. If you're a parent yourself, remember that your children are watching how you live, not just listening to what you say. And remember that relationships, like everything else worthwhile, require investment. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy, but regularly, consistently, with the understanding that love is not just a feeling, but a practice. Share this with someone who might need to make a call they've been putting off. Subscribe if these conversations help you think differently about family and relationships. And remember, the people who shaped you are still shaping you if you give them the chance. What would happen if you called someone you love today